Hello folks, I am back again with another booktube video. I have been neglecting the bookish content on this channel, but I am back. I have 3 books that I'm going to talk about. I essentially am only grouping these 3 books together because they all fit into this kind of millennial literary fiction thing. This is an area of the literary fiction genre that I personally adore. And I think that it's an area in literary fiction that's gotten a lot more attention since Normal People by Sally Rooney. So I'm really happy to talk about these 3 books today. It'll be Luster by Raven Leilani, Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan, and then finally Writers and Lovers by Lily King. So let's get started with Luster by Raven Leilani. Now, Luster, if you do not already know, is the debut novel of this author, and you would not know it from the way the writing is. I mean, it is so gorgeously written. I am in awe. It is so contemporary and so, well voiced. The prose is gorgeous. That's the first thing. Let's just get it out there. The prose of Luster is absolutely gorgeous. And there are these elements that are so relatable, and it really just feels like this very current book. It has everything from an exploration of artistry to what it's like to be broke, and I really appreciate that. I just want to give you a quick synopsis of this book. This is a book that is about a 20-something-year-old Black woman who is working in New York City, and she is having a relationship with a man who is married, and he's in an open marriage. And essentially, there is a lot going on with her emotionally, and we don't initially know what. It's a book that reminds me of the BBC show Fleabag. It's really exploring her sexuality and how she uses it and how her race really affects everything in her life. When Edie loses her job and loses her apartment, she essentially ends up living with this married man and his wife and their adopted Black daughter. And this is a white couple, and the relationship between Edie and the daughter is very interesting. And it's very interesting how these racial dynamics play out in this domestic setting. You feel like you're peeling back layers of Edie and understanding more about where she's coming from as you go on, which is something I think is very hard to pull off, but Raven Leilani does a really brilliant job with this character and with the settings. And I really love this book because it really is just such a good example of the millennial novel. In particular, this is a book that goes a little bit beyond the class analysis and characters just kind of talking about class, which is something that I think Sally Rooney's books often do. This is actually examining what it's like to be a gig worker and to not have housing and to be kind of at the mercy of your employer and to be in a city like New York as a young person. I think that you actually sense the economic struggle and strife that Edie is going through. This actually feels like what it is like to be in your 20s with no money and no place to really be. So I think that this is an excellent novel that explores these topics in a way that's very fresh, and it doesn't do any dwelling. It feels really well paced. And yeah, I just really love this book, Luster. I'm gonna say go and get it if you haven't read it. Get it from your library, get it from your local bookstore, whatever you need to do. It is so freaking good. Book 2 we're talking about is Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan. I think that Exciting Times is a bit of a misnomer for this book because I don't think that there are very exciting times. I understand why it's called that, but this isn't going to be really one of those fast-paced reads, if that's what you're looking for. To give you the rundown of this book, basically, this is about a young Irish woman who is in Hong Kong teaching English. She falls into a situationship with a young banker called Julian, who is English, and he comes from this like upper middle class background in England. And then when he goes away on a business trip, she finds herself drawn toward this young woman who I believe is an attorney in Hong Kong, called Edith. I think that what is good about Exciting Times is it is this, you know, kind of queer coming of age novel, which I enjoy, but at the same time, it has a lot of kind of angsting and strange situations. You are definitely questioning where it's going at times, and it can feel a little bit rote. I think it's a novel that is interesting for how it's written, and it's interesting because of the wittiness of the characters, but it is definitely missing something. So this is a book that I enjoyed, but I was always just waiting for something or feeling just a little unsatisfied. I would say one of my most favorite things about Exciting Times in the end of the day was the way that the Irish and English characters interact, and kind of the pompous ridiculousness of the English characters. You can definitely see these interactions happening and being kind of terrible. I find the sort of commentary on class and nationality very fun and funny, and it's an irreverent read for sure. And so if you have spare time, you know, definitely pick it up and give it a shot. So yeah, I think Exciting Times is a good read, but it definitely felt a little bit long and the pacing could have been better. But yeah, still very irreverent, very fun. So the final book that I am going to talk about in this video is a book that I genuinely and truly love, which is Writers and Lovers by Lily King. This is a book that reignited my writing fuel. Like, I have been in such writer's block, and this book had a main character who's having writer's block, which on the surface wouldn't necessarily do anything for me. I think that I am usually quite hesitant to read about characters who are writers, but this book just really like hit this experience of what it's like to be a young woman who is trying to have a creative kind of career, or is still pursuing something creative, and finding it very difficult, and also finding it difficult to work through creative drive and the lack thereof as a result of grief. To give you the quick synopsis of this book, this is a book that is about a young woman who I believe is in her early 30s called Casey, and she is in Cambridge, the area of Boston, and she is basically waiting tables and trying to figure out her writer's block after the death of her mother. There's a lot about dealing with grief, but it never feels too heavy. The thing that's interesting and that connects all three of these books is the juxtaposition of relationships. So all three of the books I've talked about today have in the center young women who are usually trying to find their way in their careers, and who in their personal lives have a very messy kind of situation when it comes to relationships. And they're usually torn between a kind of mature person or relationship and then something that is maybe more toxic or has kind of a problematic element to it. Basically, the romantic plotline that is in Writers and Lovers, the lovers in the title, are the two men that she meets, and she is kind of a bit torn between. It's not a love triangle, it's more like she's trying to sort out her own feelings. And one is with a man who is a widower and is quite a bit older than she is. He is in his 40s, I believe, and he has two young children. And then the other man who is about her age and is a fellow writer. She is figuring out what it means to work through grief and to move on in her life. Reading someone work through their sort of emotional issues in order to be creative again was just so gratifying for me, because it is such a personal experience. and because it was so delicately done. I also very much appreciated the setting. It felt so realised. I actually did live there for a couple months, and it felt very much like the Cambridge that I lived in. I could definitely imagine these various patrons of the restaurant that's in the novel kind of living in that area. And just that whole like academic-y atmosphere of Boston and Cambridge in particular felt really real. I really love this book. I can't recommend it enough. I think this is a great book if you are struggling through something and you want something that's going to help you introspect without being too heavy. And it's especially a good novel if you feel like you need to get your own creative side back. I highly recommend Writers and Lovers by Lily King. That is the third and final book I'm talking about in this video. I am not going to do any commentary on the relevance of millennial fiction, especially because I don't even know what generation I am supposed to be a part of. But I can tell you that all three of these books explore what it means to come of age, and they're all written quite well. There is this really exciting thing happening in literary fiction when it comes to coming of age stories and stories about people in their 20s. And if you feel like you don't dig literary fiction, or you think literary fiction is all about like middle-aged men cheating on their wives, it isn't. It is about 20-something-year-old women who are figuring out their careers and their lives. And I think that it's such a beneficial thing to read these books if you are in this current stage of life. Those are my thoughts on all of these. I hope that you can pick one of them up and let me know in the comments if you've read any of them, if you enjoyed them. The next video I do is probably going to be about me making wine, so stay tuned for that if you're wondering how my garden is doing or how I make wine. Yeah, so I will catch you next time. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Yeah, see ya.